once again, we can end in that beautiful minor mode. Or we can go like this. And that sort of puts a different spin on it, doesn't it? There's a little bit of joy and hopefulness and brightness. The ability to play with colors in our music is something that we love. We'll, of course, sing that hymn often at lessons and carols in December, and there's many people who think, regardless of tradition, there are Baptists who think, I sing this hymn before Christmas comes. This is so beautiful across so many traditions. Well, we're inheritors of that tradition. And speaking of how plain chant serves our liturgy, you'll find certain places in the service every single Sunday. So if I sing, "The Lord be with you," you would all sing, know it by heart. And in fact, you could go to another town in another place and go to a Catholic church, and maybe the words would be slightly different. Or you could go to an Anglo-Catholic parish that uses a Rite One service, like St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, New York City. The words would be a little bit different, but the tune is exactly the same, because these are chants that have been passed down throughout history to us. Look in the hill at the supplement section. This is the beginning, S67. S67 happens to be something called the Great Litany. The Great Litany is one of our oldest pieces of musical extant material that we still use on a yearly basis. And there are many different Sundays in the year when the Great Litany is in procession, sometimes for the first Sunday of Advent, but almost always for the first Sunday of in. So we have Sundays of Advent and in Lent, because the Sundays don't count in those 40 days of Lent. Did you catch that? So we chant this every year. You probably know this. The bishop or whomever, it can be a lay person too. Sometimes it's me from your things. "O God the Father, creator of heaven and earth." And we all sing, "Have mercy upon us." And that goes on and on, which is why it's called a litany. It goes on and on and on and on. And we just sort of become meditative in how we use that plain chant over and over and over again. Look in the hymnal at hymn 153. So here's an example of plain chant that is actually part of our Holy Week services for Palm Sunday. You see right into the hymnal here, we've got the Palms. And if you had a prayer book memorized, or if you had a prayer book in your hand, Palm Sunday is one of those days where there's a special service in the prayer book just for Palm Sunday. And the cantor or the celebrant would sing, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." And all the people respond, "Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And also with you, let us give thanks to the Lord God. It is right to give him thanks and praise. And then the celebrant sings a bunch of other stuff, and all the notes go like this, hopefully. Forever and ever. Amen. And at the procession, the deacon sings, "Let us go forth in peace." And we all sing, "In the name of Christ, Amen." And then we always get this hymn. You all know that, right? Good. So that's an example of how we use plain chant pretty frequently. This is unmetered, which means there's not a consistent go together, but there are such plain chant melodies that are so the consistent meter to them. And so the melodic contour moves in the same way as plain chant, often by stepwise motion, infrequent leaps. And it happens to be, in a sense, Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question, Richard. And because people probably online can't hear your question, I'll say, how do you know the difference between how long you're going to hold unmetered music versus metered music? Well, we just feel the flow of plain chant together. The two things you've pointed out, this hymn isn't really based on plain chant. This is from a German chorale tradition, which we'll talk about in a second. But I'm going to show you right now a version of plain chant that's been metered out. So look at hymn number 82 in your hymnal, 8-2. You probably know this. Of the Father's love begotten, right? So this originally was just a piece of plain chant. But we wanted the congregation to feel really comfortable with this, and we wanted to harmonize it, because that's the thing about plain chant is it's not usually harmonized. So maybe in the beginning we harmonized just using a drone. And you heard some music that we sang today in the service, the choir, where there were lots of drones. But there's a really beautiful thing that we start to do is we harmonize plain chant either with organum, open fifths like that. Sometimes you'll hear us sing an amen like that at the end of the Lord's Prayer, for example. We develop into more robust harmonic language. And so out of that drone, we can create which adds a little more richness to the service, right? Talk about colors. We have the austerity of plain chant that can create certain moods, and we're not afraid of the emotionalism that music can bring to something. Some Protestant traditions, which focus very much on the word being central to theology, eschew the emotional aspects of church. Others are highly emotive and eschew the intellectual side of theology. Once again, the Via Media presents us with the opportunity to draw from both of those traditions. The heady theology, and we also have the human capacity for emotional reaction. Alicia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sarum chant in particular, which is indigenous to the British Isles, and was based in many of the pagan rituals that occurred on the Salisbury Plain in Stonehenge. At Lessons and Carols in December, you'll hear us sing the O antiphons. They're colloquially referred to as the O antiphons. These are 9 great antiphons, which denominative to the deity. O wisdom, O key of David. All of these different names in which we call Christ coming among us. And you'll hear us sing these chants to a drone, and they're entirely based in Sarum chant. Martha. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's a good question. Drones are a consistent part of many different musical expressions worldwide. If you think about it, the physics of sound, it's the most fundamental, and I use the word fundamental on purpose, sound that we have. Because through the harmonic series, we derive our sense of melody and the opportunity for harmonic changes. Everything grows out of the fundamental pitch. So if I play this fundamental, you can likely hear many other pitches in the room beyond that. All the way up the scale. In fact, some people who have trouble matching pitch, it's not because they're tone deaf, it's because they're lacking the ability or the training to be able to discern what the fundamental pitch is, and they hear all of this array of sounds in the harmonic sequence above. So anybody who grew up with a teacher that said, "Oh, you're not matching pitch, just mouth the words," it wasn't a very good teacher. They didn't know what they were talking about or what they were doing. Everybody can be taught to match pitch. It's just about being able to discern what the fundamental pitch is at any given time. Now that's tricky. When you play something like the organ, there are lots of different sounds that occur at the same time, even within ranks of pipes altogether. And so sometimes that can be tough. But believe it or not, the organ is easier to discern the fundamental pitch than the piano is because of the physics of how it produces sound. The organ produces sound by a column of air, which mimics the human voice. We can cut out a lot of the high partials in the harmonic sequence by using that method of sound making, which is a percussion instrument, strikes a chord or a note, and then throughout the rest of the piano reverberates all of these sympathizing notes. So I could lift the lid on the piano, put my foot down on the pedal, sing into the soundboard, and you would start to, if there were, loud cars and things going by, you would be able to hear the sympathetic notes ringing. Yeah. Yeah. Under sympathetic notes that are sounding. Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. So along with drums, we also have particular scales that are shared worldwide. The pentatonic scale is one of them. It's used in many different world cultures, but especially in Celtic music as well. That's a scale that sounds like this. Any Koreans would recognize Arirang, which is the song of Korea. This is a pentatonic scale from an Asian culture. And we use pentatonic scales a lot in Celtic folk music too, to also draw upon. Before we get there, I want to talk about Tudor modalism. So when was the English Reformation? 16th century? Can you hone in on a decade? It took years, but yeah, it started in the 30s. The Continental Reformation of Calvin actually predates the English Reformation by a few years. But King Henry VIII, a Tudor king, and all of the composers that are associated with that era in musical history, like Tallis and Byrd, were really adept at using this mode mixture, this idea of almost keys, not quite keys, but we can switch from major to minor, back to minor, back to major, back to major, minor, major. We get this shifting sort of musical feeling that we're not quite sure. Are we in major or minor? Are we at a mysterious place or in a liminal space? This becomes an indigenous English way of making music. So much so that composers 500 years later, when nationalism is starting to rise up in European countries predating World War I, every society in Europe is trying to find indigenous music of its own culture to prove its superiority. And the English are no different. They looked all the way back. They said, we don't really have any English composers. Handel was not English. He was German, trained in Italy, and worked in the court of St. James, but he was a German. There was Purcell, I suppose. Okay, well, who came before Purcell? all the way back to Tallis and Bird and Marbeck and these different composers who were using that kind of modalism. So if you turn to hymn 170 in the hymnal, you'll see a perfect example of this kind of modal harmonic language. 170, yeah. This is a tune by Thomas Tallis. We go major. Isn't that lovely? So if you've listened to KUSC 3 or 4 times a year whenever they've got their pledge drives, you'll always hear the English 20th century composer Vaughan Williams's arrangement of this tune on a theme by Tom Tallis. And it's been used in movies. Like, did you ever see the movie Master and Commander with Russell Crowe? This was a tune that was used throughout that movie as well. We'll get to sing it to 2 different sets of text in our hymnal. This is assigned to Holy Week. In the upper part of the hymnal, it says it's a Holy Week hymn. So that's an example of some Tudor modalism. Whenever you hear those modal shifts in a hymn, you can bet you look down, it's either going to be a 16th century English composer or it's going to be a 20th century English composer imitating a 16th century composer. So I mentioned the Continental Reformation of Luther. There were really 2 Continental Reformations happening. There was Luther's Reformation in Germany, and is the other guy down in Geneva. Yeah. That's right. Luther and Calvin together, talking about these reformers, they couldn't have been more different. They were known to have corresponded with one another, but Calvin was really much, much more strict in his theology of the role that music should play. Singing in parts in corporate work. Why? Because it was too vain. It was too vain to sing in parts. And God doesn't appreciate that. They took out the stained glass windows, they took out the candles, anything that they felt smacked of popishness or Roman church. And the singing had to be unaccompanied. They didn't use the organ or instruments in corporate worship. Now, they could do these things in their home devotionals, and home devotional was a really big thing to the Calvinists. They would sing robustly in parts together. And the moment the people who take his place say, okay, we can go back to singing in parts. Yeah. Let's look at that for a second. So look at hymn 67. Here is an example of a unison hymn, which we often sing during Advent. It comes straight from the Genevan Psalter. Claude Gaudimel and wrote this tune that goes like this. It has this jaunty sort of dance-like rhythm to it, doesn't it? This tune was one of those that would be used, assigned to a psalm. That's why we call it the Genevan Psalter. In this case, Psalm 42, which happens to be the name of the tune. of this song, and we draw from that tradition as well. We also happen to mostly sing it in unison. Look at hymn 377. You'll know this one, no matter what Christian tradition you're from. Some denominations sing this every single Sunday. Anybody know the name of this tune? That's the old 100th. Well, old 100th what? Psalm. This was the tune that was associated with the 100th Psalm, which is why the tune name is. And during the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in the 1950s, the English composer Vaughan Williams, whose name I have said several times, was commissioned to write this big, florid, congregational setting of this that used a big fanfare and brass and very triumphant. And I'm almost certain that when King Charles has his coronation in a year, they'll probably use the exact same tune that comes from the Genevan Psalter. So we're drawing not just from the Lutheran tradition, but also from the Calvinist tradition as well. So while Calvin was extremely strict, Luther had a different theology. He was famous for saying, "Why should the devil have all the good tunes?" And it was not beneath him to take a secular song and put religious text to it. In fact, we've got a tune in our hymnal that we sing every year called "O Sacred Head Sore Wounded." I don't have that number written down. Let me find it real quick. Maybe somebody can beat me to it. 168. You know this tune? We sing it every Good Friday. Well, we think that this song is all about watching Christ on the cross, the crown of thorns, the stigmata of his hands, the wounds that he bears on behalf of all of us. This was originally, I hate to break it to you folks, a German drinking song called "My Fragile Mind Has Been Shattered by a Tender Maiden's Charms." Everybody knew this song if they sat around and drank together in Germany. And so you have to remember, at the time of the Lutheran Reformation, Luther didn't anticipate breaking necessarily from the Roman Church. He wanted to reform the Roman Church. He didn't think he was going to stop being a Catholic priest and create an entire sect of Christianity, Protestant sect. And at the time, the Mass was still being said ad orientem, facing eastward. And the priest's back would be turned to the congregation. The canon of the Mass, consecration of the elements would occur, would all happen in Latin, which is why things like elevations and bell ringing would happen, so that all the people who didn't speak Latin and were probably illiterate anyhow, would know the most sacred moments were happening. Well, all the Germans out in the nave of the church would get a little rowdy while this was happening, and they would just decide to sing songs on their own in German. And that's where the German Lutheran chorale tradition happens. So while all this stuff is happening, the priest is saying his hocus pocus, which is an amalgam of a Latin phrase, hoc est. The people would sing their own devotional songs in German in 4-part harmony, and that's where we get these Lutheran chorales. Now, people like Hostler People, various composers who precede Bach had these tunes. We've got this tune. Bach takes it and he harmonizes it. Get that nice mode mixture there. And if you're familiar with Bach's passions, the St. Matthew Passion and the St. John Passion, he'll use these German chorales in the Passion and he'll harmonize it differently every single time it comes based on the feel that he's trying to express. So we've got wonderful hymns. We have this Advent one. You know this one? We often sing this one in Advent as well. That's another German Lutheran chorale. Philip Nicolai was the person who originally adapted that Hans Sachs melody, Wachet auf, or Wake Up, and Bach harmonizes it. Hans Sachs, yep. The Meistersinger, you're right. Yeah, exactly. Melodies that are drawn upon by Wagner as well in Meistersinger. So that's one tradition. Another English folk tune tradition. This is really where we come to the 20th century, into that figure of English church music, Ralph Vaughan Williams. Vaughan Williams was a composer born in 1872, died in 1958. He lived a long time, and at the beginning of the 20th century, he was tasked with codifying the English hymnal. He is famously known for being agnostic in his faith, although he was put in charge of this thing. And he really had very strong feelings about the nature of church music and what it should be and how it should be ennobling to the community gathered, regardless of what his personal feelings were. There was a sense by him at the time and shared by others that some emotionalism, an overabundance of a maudlin emotionalism had crept into what he called the enervating tunes of the church, these Victorian tunes, which talk about the snow laying on the ground when the baby Jesus was born in the manger, and the cold wind is blowing through, and these things that they are things that we love, like in the bleak midwinter, Christmas tunes like that. They're part of our tradition as well. But he felt that they disfigured the service, was the word that he used in his quote. Thought that the most ennobling way that we could go about lifting up our services musically that was indigenous to the people of England, their folk tune tradition, incorporate that into the services, that there would be nothing more fundamental to the community gathered than to sing tunes that they had in their blood, in their bones. And this has also become part of our tradition. If you look at hymn 480, we've got a really beloved tune. He went around the countryside and collected all of these by oral tradition. He would go to these different villages and have somebody sing him a song a blacksmith, or a baker, or, and write down these tunes. And you can see he starts bringing back some ideas of Tudor modalism into this folk tune. Do you have just the melody in your version in the hymnal, or do you have all the harmonization too as well? Just the melody. Yeah. 516 is another wonderful example of a hymn you'll know well that uses this folk tune tradition. The tune name is in a specific place, Down Ampney. There is a tune that he writes, which we sang just last week, Sine Nomine, For All the Saints. This was not a folk tune. Let's see, what number is that? 287. 287. But he writes it in a style that's very singable. It almost sounds like it could have existed forever and ever, right? And this walking bass line. He thought that this was very, very regal and that it was very joyful. Yes. It feels kind of march-like. You know, another one that he wrote that is just like that, and this is another one unique to him, is Hail Thee Festival Day. Do you know that hymn? Let's see, it's number 216. This happens to be the text for Ascension. You get this walking bass line. Feels kind of march-like, right? That is a Ray Vaughan Williams thing. Yeah, specifically to him. Yeah, exactly. So all of this comes to America. How does the Episcopal Church come to America? With British colonialism, right? Yeah. But when the time comes that the American Revolution happens and Americans still want to be Anglicans, do you think that the English Crown was very happy to have an English bishop come and serve and consecrate an American church? Scotland. It is through Scotland. The number of Scottish immigrants in various parts of the southern United States, which is where we develop our own unique Celtic American folk music tradition as well in places like Appalachia. And so here is a tune, 686. Which is part of that tradition. I'll know this, right? Another one that we don't get to sing very often, but is a tune I really love and thoroughly American, is number 276. For thy blessed saints, a noble throng. This is a hymn, the text of which is assigned for July 25th, or the Feast of St. James. Tune. I really, really love that one. And the few times we have sung it, by the fourth or fifth verse, it's amazing how full and robust the sound of congregational singing is. So as you can see, we draw from many, many, many different traditions. We draw from the old Roman and pre-Gregorian chant tradition, particularly the Sahroom chant tradition. Also the Motes Arabic and Byzantine chant traditions. We draw from Tudor modalism and the aesthetic ideal of the time of the English Reformation. We draw from the Genevan Psalter tradition. We draw from the Lutheran German chorale tradition. We have English folk song as a big part of our musical expression, and also American folk song as well. And it's not just all compiled accidentally or by whomever's favorite tunes happened to be on the committee when the hymnal was written. It's all a reflection of the liturgies of the prayer book. And in fact, you go to the very hymnal, you can find, borrow yours real quick, Susan. For the cover page, there's all this tiny print here. Fine print, right? Prayer. Hymns referred to in the rubrics of this book are to be understood as those authorized by this church, capital C. The words of anthems are to be from Holy Scripture, or from this book, or from texts congruent with them. And then Canon 24, Section 1. It shall be the duty of every minister to see that music is used as an offering for the glory of God and as a help to the people in their worship in accordance with the Book of Common Prayer, as authorized by the rubrics or by the general convention of this church. To this end, the ministers shall have final authority in the administration of matters pertaining to music. That means I better know who my boss is. Sitting right back there. Together they shall see, in fulfilling this responsibility, the minister shall seek assistance from persons skilled in music. Together they shall see that music is appropriate to the context in which it is used. Now there's a lot of latitude there. What is appropriate? We have authorized sources. We've got many different musical sources from which we draw, not just the 82 hymnal, but can you name any other hymnals? Lift every voice and sing to, right, Levis 2, which is a compilation of many pieces of music of the African American. Wonder, Love, and Praise. Sorry? It does. Yeah, absolutely. We've got all these supplements to the hymn. These General Convention and the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies look at it and say, the hymnal is a reflection of the prayer book. And if we don't have a new prayer book, then it's not time for a new hymnal. But we can keep adding things, we can keep adding supplemental materials. Lots of sources to draw upon. Occasionally, you might come to a church like the Episcopal Church and ask, well, I'd really love such and such hymn. I sang this all the time back in my Baptist church growing up, or some other tradition. And more often than not, I say, that's not actually part of our authorized sources, because sometimes the theology isn't congruent with that of the prayer book or of the ethos of the Episcopal Church or even the canons of the Episcopal Church. Absolutely. We can always draw backwards from any. There's conform. And I feel really good about the degree to clergy and of ministers attitude about many different things. But has to first and foremost be common. And that's why we share the same words, the same musical expressions week to week. Abby. Hmm? In some places, somebody like me would choose them all, and the poor associate organist would be forced to play whatever it is that. Gather up there and and how it plays solo literature by itself and how it plays very differently for congregational music to lift everybody ideally together. We won't get to go up there, but you wouldn't want to go up there. It's pretty dusty and nasty. One wrong move and we It is operative. That concept. But I've run my mouth too long today. I'm going to let you all go. Zach can explain all. So much for being here. Yeah.